There's a fundamental starting point with respect to Hoshana Rabbah, which people talk about, and that is, you just went through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we're told that Rosh Hashanah, the judgment is written, Yom Kippur, it's sealed. It sounds like that's it, it's over. How do you have another day of judgment 10 days later? How do you do that? What is it about? And there's a great literature on it. I, in my title, hinted at one approach, which I'll explain to you, and then we'll talk about another approach. The tshuva that we do generally, and on Yom Kippur particularly, if you look carefully into the Rambam, you'll see that you can fulfill the mitzvah of tshuva even if later on, in June, you go back to the same failures that you're doing tshuva for. That does not erase the tshuva that you did in October on Yom Kippur. Nothing in the definition of tshuva says that you will never go back to the transgression again. Nothing says that. You have to make a commitment not to go back. But you don't have to succeed. And if there's a failure, the failure is written down on a new clean slate. It doesn't restore the failures before Yom Kippur from the previous year or previous years. Read the Rambam carefully with the commentaries, you'll see that that's unmistakable. So, the tshuva that you do is, at the time of Yom Kippur, you say, I plan to carry this through. And if you do that, then it's forgiven. But there is a concept that maybe there's a testing time, a finite testing time, where the sincerity of your commitment can be expressed. We, Boston Hasidim, have a custom to say Gemar Tov, a good ending, all the way to Chanukah. And one way to explain it is this. You can divide the kinds of tests that people undergo into two classes. And you can do this many different ways. I'm doing it one way for the purposes of this idea. One is when you are challenged by the achievements of Kedusha, of holiness. When there are special mitzvahs to do, and the mitzvahs require effort. Sometimes they require money, time, loss of sleep. Tishrei is a time that is filled with mitzvahs, in particular when you come to Sukkot and you move your residence into the sukkah, which must have a roof that's permeable to the rain. If it's not permeable to the rain, the sukkah is not kosher. And usually it's subject to the noises of the outside. And usually the heating in the sukkah doesn't match the heating in the house. Or the air conditioning if it's very hot. And there's a lulav and esrog, which require a great deal of knowledge to know exactly how they have to be kosher or to be special, mahudar, and they're expensive. This is a test of how well you meet the challenges of mitzvos and kedusha and holiness. It's one type of test. Hoshana Rabbah is the end of the test of holiness, because the end of Sukkot. Shmini Atzeres, there's no sukkah, there's no lulav and esrog, there's just rejoicing. Then there's a test of chol, a test of time where nothing special is happening, nothing inspiring, not even a fast day which commemorates a tragedy which can then put you in touch with your history and hopefully motivate you to try to do better. Nothing. Cheshvan, the next month, has 6 days in Shabbos, 6 days in Shabbos, 6 days in Shabbos, with no distinguished day whatsoever. Just plain ordinary time. Well, now you don't have the challenge of the inspiration of any special occasion. Can you maintain your resolve under those conditions? The two conditions are really opposite in the way they affect you psychologically and spiritually. Chanukah is the end of that period. You get to Chanukah. If you manage to make it all the way to Chanukah, you've passed both tests. And then you really can say that you have a Gemar Tov, a good ending, because not only was your resolution sincere on Yom Kippur, but for the period of a couple of months, you actually managed to keep it. And that encompassed the two different types of tests that people have to face. Then, even if in June it is a relapse, still, it's not going to undo what happened at Yom Kippur. So that's one way to look at the idea of judgment on Hoshana Rabbah, is a judgment in how well your resolve of Yom Kippur kept you through the period of Kedusha, and Chanukah, how well you were able to maintain it through the period of regular time without any special inspiration. That's one idea. Now, you know what happened at Hoshana Rabbah in the temple. They had giant, what we would call aravos, and they paraded with them around the altar, and they were so tall that they leaned over onto the altar. And what we said was, Yofi lach mizbeach, how beautiful for you, the altar that's surrounded by these aravos. Now, I suppose that you learned before Sukkot that in the lulav you have 4 different species of plant, and each species, because of its very nature, its physical nature, represents a certain class of Jews. The esrog, which has a good taste and a good aroma, represents a Jew who has Torah and mitzvos. The hadassim, which have only aroma, represent Jews who have only Torah but not mitzvos. The lulav, which comes from the palm tree, which has dates, has taste but no aroma. Those are ones who have Torah and not mitzvos. I said the wrong way, the other way. The hadassim have aroma and not, right? And then the lulav has neither Torah nor mitzvos, and they're all bound together in the lulav. So, I was asked this year, this item, the arava, that has neither taste nor aroma, that's what you're using to put around the altar, and you say how beautiful the altar is because it's surrounded by aravos. What exactly is the sentiment here? If it's referring to Jews who have neither Torah nor mitzvos. So first of all, let's not exaggerate what these ideas from Chazal are telling us. When we say no Torah, we don't mean a person who never heard of Shabbos or doesn't know that God created the world or doesn't know who Moses was. That's not what we mean when we say no Torah. We don't mean someone who came from an assimilated Jewish family in Minnesota and has never heard of these things. When I was teaching university, a student came to me who was doing creative writing, and he said, and he came from Long Island, and he said, I'm attracted to Jewish subjects. He's a Jewish person. And I hear words that are associated with Jews, and I don't know what they mean. Could you explain to me what these words mean? Oh, let's hear what's bothering you. He said, yeah, the word kosher. What does that mean? Grew up in Long Island. I have no idea what kosher means. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a person whose Torah understanding is, at best, average, not outstanding in any way, and not what we would call a real grasp and a detailed grasp. He manages to pull himself along. Same thing true with mitzvahs. We're not talking about a person who doesn't perform any mitzvahs. We're talking about people who do mitzvahs out of habit. This is what my grandfather did. I remember when he did it, so I do it also. Yeah, there's a creator, and I'm sure that he's interested in my doing it. Fine, okay. Now, get to work and just carry yourself through the day. Talking about people who are utterly undistinguished in their Torah knowledge and in their mitzvah performance. Well, there's a lot of literature on why the lulav has in it the 4 species, including the arava. What's the arava doing there? And if you think about it, when you start Yom Kippur, we have that famous mournful chant of the Chazan, Anu matirin v'hispalel im havayonim. We give permission to pray with sinners. And the Gemara in Tanya says, any fast day that the Jewish people undertakes and doesn't have avayonim, transgressors in it, is not going to be successful. It's not going to be successful. So what exactly is going on? So the Maharal has a philosophy with a very central concept of shleimus. Shleimus means completeness. Now you have to be very careful. Sometimes shleimus is translated as perfection. Perfection is a very tricky concept. Completeness means you have an item and it has a certain definition and it has all the features that that item ought to have. That doesn't mean it's the greatest of all items. It's not the greatest of all things. It's just that it's not missing anything. Let's take a crude comparison between a motorcycle and a limousine. The fact that a motorcycle lacks a light, or lacks a horn, or lacks a brake, that motorcycle is in trouble because it lacks a feature that's necessary for it to function. When the motorcycle has everything it needs and functions perfectly as a motorcycle, it still can't do a lot of things the limousine can do. But it's a nice motorcycle. It's a complete motorcycle. There's a certain virtue in having shleimus, in having completeness of what you are. The Maharal, perhaps surprisingly, applies this to the first temple. The first temple had a certain shleimus. It had all the features that were necessary for it to do the job it was doing at the time. But when we come to the end of history and we are making our transition to another state of being altogether, says the Maharal, that temple wouldn't be satisfactory. It has to be a new temple. And since this temple, the first one, is shalem, it has all of the features it needs to fulfill its identity, it has to be destroyed. You can't give to something that's complete. Something that's complete has no empty spaces to add anything to. If you need something that's superior to it, this has to be undone and replaced by something else. The destruction of the temple was a necessary step in getting to the building of the ideal temple, which in the times of the Mashiach will be have a different character. So, if you have something that's shalom, it can't be improved upon. So now, you're coming to the Jewish people who are trying to achieve something. What about the shleimus of the Jewish people? Anyone who wants to be identified, anyone who chooses a Jewish identity, a genuine Jewish identity, is part of the Jewish people. So let's say that his Torah knowledge is very deficient. Let's say that his practice is, in quality and quantity, inferior. So what? If he's not there, then the Jewish people isn't complete. If the Jewish people isn't complete, it can't accomplish what needs to be done when it needs to be done by the people as a whole. So, that being the case, bringing the arava to the mizbeach, to the altar on Hoshana Rabbah, means we're pulling everyone in. Everyone has to be there. The beauty of the altar is not that the arava is there, it's that even the arava is there, which means that you have everything together, and in that case you have the wholeness of the Jewish people. That's the message in the lulav also. You have the 4 species. And all of them have to be together. That's what the Gemara in Tanis is telling you. If the transgressors aren't part of the fast, then you don't have the shleimus of the Jewish people. If you don't have the shleimus, then that which needs to be accomplished by the people is going to be handicapped and often impossible because you don't have the completeness of the people. Because Baruch Hu has commitments to the Jewish people as a whole that he doesn't have to individual Jews, but it has to be the wholeness of the people. And then, perhaps, we can give another understanding to the idea of what the judgment on Hoshana Rabbah is. I'm sure you've heard that the verse in Isaiah says, Yeshua said, seek out Hashem when he's found, call to him when he's close. When is that? The 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. That's when he's close and that's when he's found. Chazal tell us that this idea that he's found at that time in a way that he isn't found the rest of the year, and that's when you should seek him out, that instruction only applies to individuals. For individuals, October and January aren't equal. If a person does tshuva in October, in January, maybe Kodesh Baruch Hu will accept it right away, maybe he won't accept it right away. But that doesn't apply to the klal, to the tzibur, to the Jewish people as a whole. Whenever the Jewish people does tshuva, it will be accepted right away, and the results will be applied right away. So now, we went through Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. How did we experience it? With what identity did we participate in it? Rav Dester says, interestingly, there are 2 days of Rosh Hashanah because there are two dimensions of judgment. One is, how did you do last year? What's your record from last year? It's the upside, it's the downside. How should we balance it out? What should be your designated position in the coming year according to your performance? The second day is a different judgment. How important were you for other Jews? What role did you play in moving the community forward? What role did you play in as an element in a corporate entity called Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people as a whole, and you make a contribution to that cloud, to that general entity? And it could be, he says, that someone who fails on the first day could succeed on the second day, and that could save him. We're always playing this double role of the individual and also the member of the community. The Vidui on Yom Kippur, 4 words, Aval anachnu v'avoseinu chatanu. We and our ancestors have sinned. What does it mean? You're making confession for your ancestors? Confession is part of tshuva. I can't do tshuva for what you did. I can do tshuva for what I did. Maybe I could inspire you for you to do tshuva what you did, but confession, if I'm going to confess your sins, that makes absolutely no sense. That's true. But there are 2 dimensions, and in fact, one of the commentaries in the Shulchan Aruch says that's why the word Yom Kippur in the text is always Yom Kippurim, plural. Many atonements. You never heard a person say that, one person to another. What are you going to do in Yom Kippurim? Nobody ever talks like that. Yom Kippur. Why didn't the Torah talk like that? So there are many answers. The Zohar asks the question, and others. But one answer is that there's an atonement for me as an individual, for us as individuals, and also for the nation as a whole. Like I heard from Rabbi Soloveitchik in Boston, Tzibur Lo Meis, the community doesn't die, individual people die, but the community doesn't die. The the people of Israel, singular, not plural, the people of Israel doesn't die. So, just like if a person does a transgression when he's 36 and he decides to do tshuva when he's 45, no one says, oh, it's not the same person, it's 9 years later. No, it's the same person 9 years later. The same thing's true with the tzibur, the community. If a transgression takes place in 1950, then the community in 2020, 70 years later, can do tshuva because it's the same community. Even though there are different people in it, but it's the same community. So on Yom Kippur, you have a double role. You're, on the one hand, taking responsibility for the things that you did, and you're also, as a member of the corporate entity called the Jewish people, taking responsibility at this time for what the Jewish people did at a different time. Both things are going on. Okay, so now back to the original question. On Rosh Hashanah, everything was written down. And on Yom Kippur, it was all sealed. Sealed. Does that mean there's nothing left to do? Well, it depends. In a certain sense, for the individual, there's nothing left to do because it's signed and sealed. But what about the community? Suppose the community as a whole decides to do tshuva. Then that will tear up every decree. That will tear up every divine decision. The community has the ability to overturn. It's like, one person put it to me, it's like appealing, like making an appeal. Okay, this court gave you a judgment. It's not over because you can appeal over the head of that court. Here, if the community will do tshuva, then the community has access still to be able to overcome the decree. So that's another way of looking at Hoshana Rabbah. You put the aravos on the mizbech. By saying that, you're saying that we're creating the wholeness of the Jewish people, and that means we're trying to do a communal tshuva. When you take tomorrow, when you take the arava and you hold it and say the prayer with it, bang it on the floor, think in terms also of the community and the possibility of tearing up the decree. Tearing up the decree, because the community can do that. I asked myself before in Elul, I thought to myself, last year, when we had Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you have the Unasan Tokef prayer, who by fire, who by starvation, who's going to die, who's going to live. Do we know what we were talking about? On Hashem, Oshiana, please Hashem, save us. Do we know what we were talking about? The Hoshanas? I mean, no one anticipated Simchas Torah last year. And yet that's what the words were about. So you walk into this year and you think, do I know what I'm talking about? Do I know what it means? Do I know how it will apply? Very hard to know. Very hard to know. But having in mind that I don't know is a big step forward. Because then you open your mind up and you say, look, wherever it's going to land, I want this to be my contribution. And finally, I just heard now, where I was, the suit of Dovid HaMelech, someone said a very interesting thing. You take the arava, what we call the Hoshanas, and you bang them on the floor, and then, I don't know, do you do it here? You throw it up on top of the... There's a platform they put up? They just throw them. Most shuls have a platform above the Aron Kodesh, and you throw them up and they sit there. They sit there. So he said, I think it was the Kloisenberger Rabbi who said, what you clap on the floor is very dear to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's very dear. Yes, there were failures, and yes, there were gzeros and so on and so on. But the Jew is standing there, and he's clapping them. And he's standing there and still asking that it should be forgiven and undone. And when a Jew does that, then it's precious, and then it goes up on top of the Aron Kodesh. The Holy Ark goes up on top of the Holy Ark to be something which represents where we're standing. The people who don't have outstanding Torah and don't have outstanding mitzvos often have outstanding connection to Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's famous that in the Spanish Inquisition, when it was convert or die, many of the common people refused to convert. There's a sense of kashrus. Well, it's expensive, and Shabbos, yeah, but there are things that need to be done. But put on a cross? No. that shows where the real internal strength and focus of that Jew is. You can't push me there. You can't push me there. Yeah, sometimes when there are sacrifices, but this, absolutely not. And it was noted that the so-called simple people drew a line in the sand and said, no. And other people who knew more were not often as connected as that. So we have to understand that these people are a necessary part of the Jewish people. And when someone has less an education than we do, we have to have pity for such a person. The person didn't have the opportunities that we have, and to look for ways to make sure that they feel included in the Jewish people, included and necessary. Tell them we can't get there without you. We can't get there without you. That gives us the shleimus as a people, the unity that gives us our identity, and with that, we have another opportunity tomorrow to try to do tshuva as a community and to erase whatever decrees that were written on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. It can be erased and made good.